Now we're opening time for some discussion, questions, and answers. So I'm going to ask our online speakers to stay online, as our Professor Penny said a few minutes ago. So yes, please, jury, it's your time now. If you have any questions, you're free to ask.
Oh, thank you. I got a few questions. Can I all of them at once?
You can ask our online participants if you want to, and you can just refer to the one that you're asking the question so that they know, because they cannot see us.
Okay, very well. This is for Avi, and it comes from the personal experience, which has to do with the Jews of the Arab world. Are they seen also as victims, and do they have any kind of say about what's going on in terms of reparations or things of that sort? And how do you, from your own personal experience, where do you put yourself in this situation? For Jeff, he mentioned the principles of combatant and non-combatant cannot be applied. And I think he said it in the context of the victims. And then he talked about resistance. He distinguished between armed and non-armed resistance. And in that context, are there differences between combatants and non-combatants, since all of them are settler colonialists, whether by choice or by being there? For Mr. Yanis Varoufakis, I wonder if he can answer this question about when you are a victim of a system and you're being exploited economically, is there a way that the victims can disengage, economically speaking, from their victimizers? In other words, the people of Gaza and the West Bank, can you think of any model by which they can disengage from that, again, as part of their resistance? And finally, for Lana, she was asked about the question about why does Zionism persist? Can you identify from your perspective what would be the main sources of the Zionist strength and perpetuation? What would they be? Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. There are quite a few questions there. So what I'm going to suggest is that we take them one by one now. And we begin with the question that you directed, I think, to Avi. Is that right? Your first question was to Avi. So.
Thank you for your question to me about my personal experience. I've written an autobiography called 3 Worlds, Memoirs of an Arab Jew. And in it I try to interweave a family history with a broader history of the Jews of Iraq. And I think of it as my impersonal autobiography. And my wife, who read it chapter by chapter, said to me one day, "Avi, I'm very worried. I'm on chapter 5 and you weren't born yet." And the reason for this is that I wanted to write an account of what it was like to be Arab Jews, Jews of the Arab lands. Israel, the Zionist movement, is a movement by European Jews for European Jews. It didn't include us. After Israel was created in 1948, and after the Holocaust, the Zionist leaders looked for Jews from wherever they could find them, including the Jews of the Arab lands. But they looked down on Arabs as backward and inferior, and they looked down on us as equally inferior, but they needed us for building the state of Israel. So we were in Iraq, we were a minority. Iraq didn't have a Jewish problem. Europe had a Jewish problem. In Iraq there are many minorities, and we were one minority among many, and there was a tradition of religious tolerance between the minorities. In Israel, we became second-class citizens, and it took Europe much longer to accept Jews as equal citizens than it took the Arab world.
Thank you.
Before we continue, I would just like to ask, I know that the subject is extremely complex and extremely wide, but all of the participants to keep their answers short and sharp, because I'm sure that jury has a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Avi. The next question was for Jeff. And so, Jeff, if you could be brief, that would be terrific, and it related to resistance, armed and non-armed.
You know I can't be brief.
I'm here to make sure you are.
I didn't quite understand everything. It's a little, the sound isn't so good, but I think I can relate to this. We have to put this into a wider framework. We're using the concept of settler colonialism not only as a kind of an analytical framework, but basically it's essentially different from a conflict. There's a conflict between conflict and settler colonialism. We all use the terms the Arab-Palestinian conflict. The Palestinians talk about a conflict. It's not a conflict. A conflict is between two sides, right? And somehow they get into some kind of a dispute, of a fight. And how do you resolve a conflict? Through compromise and negotiations, conflict resolution. Well, colonialism, including settler colonialism, is unilateral. The Palestinians, like I said, were never in a fight with Jews. They're not a side. And to call this a conflict, to raise the Zionists and the Israelis to the level of a side in a conflict is legitimizing an illegal, immoral, unjust colonial movement to a legitimate side. Once the Palestinians recognize Israel as a side, they've legitimized what's basically settler colonialism. So there's a conflict between the whole idea of a conflict and settler colonialism. It isn't only an analytical framework. It really is a whole different type of contention, you know. And at the same time, the Palestinians are an indigenous people living on their lands, having their cultures. All of a sudden, they find themselves reduced to being a side. Now they have to defend why they're on their land, what are they doing in a Jewish country at all? You know, why are they resisting? You know, they have to defend why they're resisting colonialism. So if the minute we use the word conflict, we're trapping the Palestinians into a lose-lose kind of a framework, and that's true in terms of things like you know, terms like combatants and non-combatants. Because if you look at this as a conflict, the Palestinians are a military side, and then they're subject to and limited to the rules of lawfare. But in settler colonialism, it's a conflict, if you want to put it that way, or a contest between two peoples. So the colonists come in and it's military for them, but you can't compare. There's no symmetry between the violence of a military-based colonial movement intent on conquering a country and the resistance of the indigenous population. And so, you know, the danger of this idea of a conflict and placing the Palestinians within the framework of combatants in a conflict.
I'm sorry, but I don't have the time to wait much longer for what is supposed to be a brief interjection. So I won't waste your time. I'm leaving. Thank you.
Oh, Yanis, we have the next question. Are you
Oh, no,
okay
I'm sorry, but you have not kept to the rules of our debate. Some people have had a lot more time, and I did make my deposition. I hope the jury comes to a verdict that will help the struggle. but I'm not prepared to sit idly by while the moderation is taking this particular turn.
I'm sorry.
Okay? So I'm handing over my time to other speakers. Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you very much for your contribution. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, as we said, we know that the topic is really complex and wide. That's why we are trying to keep our answers short and sharp. So yeah, let's go to the next questions. We have like
And
5 to 7 minutes.
the next question was to Lana, and the question was, can you identify the main sources of Zionist strength? Is Lana in the room?
Yes, please, if you can.
Yes, sure. The question, Lana, was, can you identify the main sources of Zionist strength? Comes from Sami Al-Arian.
There are several. First of all, the Zionist ideology is part of imperialism and Western imperialism and colonialism, so the interests align. The second issue is obviously the view of the Holocaust as exceptional form of genocide, and that has given the West has given quite a bit of impunity to Israel in the name of Jewish history. And what happens in that space is also part of it, that we Palestinians are being cast as inherently anti-Semitic. The racism against us is not being recognized, and it's more than that. We're seen as the producers of the worst type of racism as it acknowledged in the West. So there is that aspect as well. But it's really important to locate Zionism within particular history, Western history of imperialism, race, and colonialism. And the alignment is there, and we see Western countries prioritizing the interests of Israel over their own citizens, precisely because they see the interests of Israel as their own interests. But it's a big question, so I'm gonna...
Thank you, Lana. I think Chandra has the next question.
My question is related to Yannis' presentation.
He's gone now.
So he's not going to be able to answer this here. But for the sake of our audience here, I thought that one of the points that should also be considered is, if you look at the support of the USSR for the creation of Israel in 1948, and the factors that generated that support, related to the Holocaust, it was related to the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, and there was a very strong sentiment prevailing within the Soviet Union about the state, the plight of the Jews. In other words, when you discuss how important capitalism was to the whole process, you cannot ignore these other factors, which were also very, very important. In other words, even if you didn't have the intertwining of Zionist interests with capitalism, what had happened to the Jews, the Holocaust, and everything else would also merit consideration.
Thank you, Chandra. Are there any other questions from our jurors? Okay, in that case, I'd like to thank the online presenters very much, and I'll hand over to Marima.
Thank you. I guess that's it for questions and answers and discussion for today when it comes to this segment of today's first day of a conference. Thank you for the online speakers. Thank you for your time and your patience. And yes, now I will give you a break for coffee, 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll be head back to listen to witness stories to those who were in the genocide area, who survived and who have a lot to say.